We're joined today by a very special guest, one of the best recruiting experts in the game today. He is Hank South from Horns 24/7 and horns247.com, joining the BK show today to talk all things Texas Longhorn recruiting and the transfer portal. So much going on in the world of recruiting, and Hank kind enough to give us a few minutes to discuss. Hank, thanks so much for the time, man. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking me to jump on. How are you?
Oh, doing great, man. Doing great. So, plenty to get into. We'll talk transfer portal. We'll talk National Signing Day. We'll talk class of 2026 and everything in between. But want to go back a couple of days. Hero Kanu, got to be the first hero to ever commit to the Texas Longhorns. He transfers in from Ohio State. I know you've written a couple of pieces about him on horns247.com. What can you tell us about Hero Kanu and what he's going to bring to the Longhorns this coming season?
Yeah, I think just from a broad perspective, depth at defensive line. Texas obviously that's an area of need. They didn't sign much in 2024 by the way of high school. They got some portal guys. All those guys are out of eligibility or moving on. They did a lot better this cycle in 2025 with the three high school additions they're bringing in, and obviously Travis Shaw and Cole Brevard out of the portal earlier. But there was still, and even with Kanu, that they might, still kind of keep their eye on the portal in the spring. But the big overall, thing this addressed was the depth on the defensive front. I think you can probably pin in Shaw and Brevard as the starters. But I think I think Hero is a kid that's going to come in and push them and possibly compete. I would expect him to be in the rotation as well. They don't really take transfers in the portal. Texas doesn't if there isn't intention to play them right away. But I mean, you're getting a kid from Ohio State. In terms of like defensive line meccas, that's probably where you want to look in the portal if you can get him. A kid that's still relatively new to football. He moved to California in 2020. He started playing organized football in 2021. So I mean, we're just a few seasons removed from him just playing football in general. So, you look at his stat sheet at Ohio State, he's behind some draft picks, guys that are playing ahead of him, going to play on Sundays. He has 14 tackles in 2 seasons of play, 1 sack. Obviously not the biggest numbers. You can kind of look at stats a little bit deeper here, if he's clearing up space for somebody else to do something, big bodies typically can be asked to do that. But I talked to his trainer, Brandon Collier, and he was saying he thinks he's more an SEC style defensive lineman. He thinks he'll thrive more in Texas's scheme. And he mentioned too he was leaving a starting job at Ohio State, and obviously he didn't start this past season. But you look ahead to 2025, he's a kid that was going to be in the mix alongside guys like Edric Houston, Caden McDonald, to probably play more in Columbus. So I think it's a great addition. A kid that's 6'5", 315 ish, a former club soccer player. So, the athletic profile is there, big man that can move. I think once Texas gets their hands on him, gets him in the strength and conditioning program, has a spring with him to kind of get him implemented or get him up to speed with what they do. I think he could be a guy that, maybe has like a Jermaine Lole type impact that we saw this past season.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is like an Alfred Collins or Vernon Broughton situation where the guy didn't play because he wasn't good enough. He just didn't play because the guys ahead of him were NFL caliber players.
Exactly.
Hopefully, when Kanu gets a few more snaps here in Austin, he can make a big impact in 2025 and maybe in 2026 as well. Hey, you mentioned the portal, Hank. It's obviously closed right now. No one can enter right now. I want to get your thoughts on post spring potential targets for Texas. But before we get to spring ball, Texas has added 5 portal players so far, 4 on defense, and then the punter, Jack Bomeister. Anybody out there right now, maybe the Notre Dame offensive lineman that hit the portal after the championship game? Do you see Texas in the mix for anybody who's currently in the portal?
So, I don't want to say no. I never want to say never because, the portal, with Hero Kanu, they called him on, this is what I heard. They called him on Saturday, had him on campus Sunday,
Oh,
and the rest was history. So they can move quickly in the portal if they decide to. There aren't any names right now I'm hearing them connected to. The Notre Dame offensive lineman, it would make sense, looking at it on paper. Texas brought in an interior offensive lineman from USC for an official visit a few weeks back. He ended up committing elsewhere. So it seems like they are looking at that interior offensive line. Obviously, they have DJ Campbell back. They have some guys back that have playing experience. But you're transitioning several, longtime starters on that offensive line, and so it doesn't hurt to have kind of a veteran experience. So that brings in the question of from Pat Coogan, the Notre Dame center. There was some speculation that Texas offered him. I was told they did not, and this was, I think Monday when I was told this. So we're sitting here later in the week. It could change, but I don't see Texas moving on him just yet, or at all. So we'll see. But beyond that, in the portal right now, I haven't heard any other names they're tied to. I think this might turn into more of a spring window kind of thing to see, let's get through spring practice, see where we're at, and see what we need to really address in that 10-day spring window.
Yeah, yeah, kind of following up on that, Hank. I mean, look, it's impossible to know which players are going to enter the portal from around the
Right.
country, but when you look at positions, right? Are there a couple of positions you think maybe the Texas coaching staff is monitoring more in the spring to see if they have enough, and maybe they'll consider going to the portal for a little bit more once spring ball is done?
Yeah, I think, you look at wide receiver. I think, that's an area we've been told several times Texas really likes the guys they have on the roster. We didn't see a lot of the younger kids this year outside of Ryan Wingo, just because they were top heavy with veteran talent with, Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, Wingo, DeAndre Moore. Those guys were getting the bulk of the snaps. So, I think obviously they're going to, go through spring, see what they have. We'll see if Aaron Butler can make some noise, Parker Livingston. Obviously we would expect Ryan Wingo to take that next step, Demo to obviously continue doing what he's doing. And we'll see what these new guys, Jamie French, Khalid Lockett, Dalen McCutcheon, even Ryan Niblett, he's not new, but a guy that maybe if he transitions back to wide receiver after helping out at running back this season, see what he can do. So I think that's an area, they maybe look back on in the spring and say, hey, let's go get a one and done type talent like we did with Matthew Golden or Isaiah Bonds. Obviously depending on who's puts their name in the portal. They're not just going to go get somebody to get somebody. So I think that's an area. I think tight end, obviously, with Amari Niblack leaving, you have another spot. You have some talented guys. You just don't have a lot of them. So you're losing Gunnar Helm and Juan Davis. Maybe you want to go get a guy that can come in and help right away alongside Spencer Shannon and Jordan Washington, and even to an extent Nick Townsend. Again, I think defensive line, let's see, they'll probably see what they're working with in the spring, see how these transfer portal additions fill in, see what the young guys bring with Myron Charles, obviously Alex January coming back and some of the other guys. And then, I'm curious too at cornerback, you have Jahdae Barron leaving, you have Manny Muhammad back, Gilbo back. But do they feel good about Kobe Black? I mean, I'm sure he flashed when he had opportunities to. I'm sure this will be a big spring for him. Is that a spot? Maybe even Cade Phillips tries to make some noise this spring in camp. But maybe like we saw last year in the spring, they went out and got Javion Cole. Obviously he didn't really pan out as probably they wanted him to. But it shows that that maybe that's an area they try to go get someone with such a big hole you're filling with Jahdae Barron leaving.
Yeah.
Maybe that's an area as well. And also, I'll be curious too with kicker.
Mm.
Obviously there's been reports that Burt Albert's coming back. Starting to have the kicking duties in the Cotton Bowl. If there's a really good kicker out there, is that a spot they try to move on as well?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow for sure. Hank, I want to ask you about KJ Lacy. I saw he was named Mr. Football in the state of Alabama earlier this week. You've been following him for a while now. Heck, you used to cover Alabama, so I'm sure you knew about him before Texas even got in the mix. But your thoughts on KJ Lacy? I know everyone's pumped for the Arch Manning era, and then Trey Owens might be next in line. But KJ Lacy, what you've seen from him and what you think he could do at the University of Texas.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see because I'm not one sitting here that's never coached football to question a Steve Sarkisian quarterback evaluation. I think he has a pretty good record, going for himself and identifying guys. And with KJ Lacy, they identified him. They took his commitment shortly after his sophomore season, and they never, Texas never wavered, KJ never wavered, and this is a cycle where we saw Keelan Russell, who's I think the number one overall recruit in the 24/7 Sports Composite now. He was available for quite a while, and Texas was happy with KJ Lacy, and they were interested in Russell as well, but that was something they didn't want to mess anything up with KJ Lacy by pursuing Keelan Russell, and so Lacy's a kid that he's not going to blow you away with measurables or his speed or anything. He just does all the little things right. Like he's a coachable. You know, he has high football IQ, has a strong arm. He's efficient. He's productive. He does everything you want to do. He's played at a high level for 3 years at Saraland, which is one of the top programs in the state of Alabama. He's number 2 passer overall in state history with over 10,000 yards passing. And a lot of the question was, how is he going to perform in his first year without Ryan Williams to throw to? Well, he had one of his best years. So like he's a really, really good player. He's already on campus, enrolled at Texas. Going to go through the spring. And so, I'm curious how this, eventually there's going to come a time where, he's going to be competing with, Trey Owens, maybe Diabell, once the Arch Manning era is over. So I think he can make some noise. He's a talented kid. And obviously, Sark, AJ Milwee, they all see something in him that, I think he'll be pretty special.
Texas held its 2025 Junior Day last weekend. I know you've written a bunch of stories about this. I'm sure you could talk about it for hours. But look, some people want to talk to you like the day after Junior Day, but I want to let things marinate for a little bit, give you the chance to catch up with all of the recruits and all of the guys who were here in Austin. So, one or two names or just some of your biggest storylines from the guys Texas hosted last
Yeah.
weekend.
I mean, there's a lot of them. This is another pretty strong class, especially in the state of Texas. I think the offensive line, last class in the state was really strong. Texas ended up not getting any of those guys. Obviously Fasusi was the main one they were trying to get. He went to Oklahoma. But you look at this class now. I mean, Felix Ojo, kid that's pushing 6'8". I mean, just a long athletic tackle. Like if you tried to draw a left tackle, like Felix Ojo is what you would draw. And so, he was on campus. I think that's one that Texas is continuing to trend well for. So, he was one of the bigger, guys we talked to on Saturday. And, other offensive linemen that could very well end up in this class that were on campus, Nick Robertson from Klein, Zayden Crimpin from Prosper, a few others. John Turntine wasn't there. He couldn't make it, but I don't think that's a huge concern. He's been on campus probably 10 times and has family in Austin. So, he's a guy that'll be on campus plenty going forward. And then I know I'm not naming other offensive linemen that were there. Drew Evers was there. I'm not totally sure on him, where he's going to end up. But yeah, really strong offensive line class would be one of my big takeaways. Kind of like the elite two-way talents in the state. You look at Jermaine Bishop Jr., who's like some of the best film you've ever seen at the high school level, both sides of the ball. He was on campus, top 100 athlete, probably going to play receiver if he picks Texas, but could be a top cornerback as well. And then Jalen Lott, who's obviously a Texas legacy. Dad and mom both attended Texas. He is a guy that also rated as a top athlete. There's talk about where he's going to end up. He wants to play wide receiver at the college level. If or most schools are going to recruit him a corner. That's a big question. I think athlete designation right now for him. So kind of just two really unique elite talents there that were both on campus, both have, really good things to say about Texas. And then I think the last one I would mention, and, again, a bunch of kids on campus, so we could talk about it a long time, but Jamion Winfield, Richardson defensive lineman. We talk about, like the Texas recruiting conversation always starts with interior defensive line talk. He just moved in from the state of Mississippi, from Meridian, Mississippi. He's at Richardson High School now. Really quiet kid, so nobody's really talked to him yet. And so we were able to catch up with him a little bit when he was done on Saturday. And it sounds like Texas has really impressed he and his mom. And again, he's not going to give away much. He's a pretty, soft-spoken kid. But I think Texas is right there for him. They just offered him, 3 weeks ago. So they're still newly into this recruitment with him. But I think he could emerge as kind of your probably your top interior defensive line target at this juncture if you're trying to circle some. So he was really impressive. And I think Texas is in a good spot for him as well.
Yeah, generally speaking, Hank, just looking at the class of 2026, where you made a mention it, right? Offensive line, defensive line, that could be the answer. But what are the positions of need or want you think for Texas? Like, who are they really going to focus on when trying to fill out this class?
Yeah, I think, like you just said, I think offensive line is going to be important. It hasn't really been a spot they've needed guys. It's been a really deep area on the team for a while. And, as guys, we're seeing guys go to the draft now. Depending on how next season goes, Gooseby could be putting his name in the draft, or, other guys could boost their stock enough to where I think it's time they really need to replenish the offensive line. And they had a good class in 2025. We saw John Mills flip late. That wasn't a situation where Texas said no thanks. Like he flipped to Washington. He just wanted to stay out west. And so you're down a guy there. I think offensive line will be a big priority in 2026, and it's a good class for it to be a priority. I think the bulk of your class could have been on campus last weekend with, with Ojo. Max Wright, I didn't even mention the other big offensive tackle target. He could be a guy that commits here shortly too. He's naming Texas his leader. He wants to narrow things down soon. Another kid that's pushing 6'8", so that's just really big tackles that they're going after, and then some strong interior guys as well. So offensive line, I think defensive line is always going to be important. This wide receiver class looks really good. Last year it was top heavy with DeCorian Moore and Khalil Lockett. Now it's kind of like spread out throughout the top 247, where there's just like really quality wide receivers out there. And I know Chris Jackson was just out on the road this weekend seeing there's a lot of in-state talent. We mentioned Jermaine Bishop, some other kids, Jordan Clay, Jalen Lott. And then if you go out of state, there's just a wealth of talent. I mean, this week alone, Chris Jackson saw Naeem Burrows in Jacksonville. He saw Jabari Mack in Louisiana. He saw Tristan Keys in Mississippi and Aaron Gregory, who's committed to Texas A&M in Georgia. So just all across the Southeast, there's like a top receiver in each of those states that, Texas is probably going to get one or two of those guys, I would imagine. So yeah, that's another area too. And, and again, this all depends on the portal. One area that might not be a need today, once the portal opens up again, could be a need tomorrow if there's some sort of exodus. Texas is pretty good about preventing exoduses, but I don't know if that's the plural of that word, but they're pretty good at retaining their guys on their roster. So I don't think that's a huge concern. But those are a couple areas maybe we look at in 2026.
We'll go with it. Exodus is Exodi, Exodus. I don't know.
Yeah.
That works for me. All right, two more for you, Hank. Really appreciate your time, man. This has been a lot of fun. This is more of a personal one for me, and maybe some people watching are curious about this as well. Everyone was obviously pumped when Steve Sarkisian signed his extension, but he wasn't the only guy on this staff to sign an extension. Brandon Harris, the GM of the staff, also inked a long-term contract extension to stick around Austin. The GM position is kind of a new one to college football. Obviously, it's been a thing in the NFL forever. But what does Brandon Harris do for Texas, and what type of impact will he continue to have on the Longhorns acquiring talent moving forward?
Yeah. I don't even know if you could begin to just put his job requirements in I don't know if I could give him enough credit. I
Yeah.
mean, he's obviously Sark's right-hand man. If you're at a recruiting event, Brandon Harris is there front and center. He's kind of, not, I mean, the face of the pro. He's like, the face of recruiting almost for Texas. I know, with the GM role, everyone's saying, you hear that in college football. It's like, what the heck? It's like, well, it's about to be rev share. Kids are agreeing to deals to come to schools for dollar amounts. Like, you need a general manager. You need guys that can kind of facilitate all this and kind of keep everything organized. And I know that, the off the field staff does a lot of work in trying to model, their program after how front offices do and how they allocate things where, how NIL is, uh, divided, all that stuff. So that falls under his umbrella. I know player personnel stuff falls under his umbrella with James Jones. Recruiting visit weekends, how those are going, their board, who they're talking to. I mean, everything kind of falls under his watch. So, it's an absolutely necessary position in college football, and you're seeing it become more and more important at the programs that are excelling the most. Alabama with Courtney Morgan, they've recruited really well with having a person in that role. So, Brandon Harris does a lot. Recruiting, personnel, NIL, you name it. That's what that falls under Brandon Harris's umbrella. And obviously he does it really well. And he's been rewarded for that with this new contract.
Yeah, tough to put all that on a LinkedIn page, it sounds like. And that's crazy. All right, last one, Hank. I mean, I'm just going to ask you point blank. This is an unfair question and an impossible one to answer because we're like 11 months away from the first signing day
Sure.
in the class of 2026. But You feel like Texas could go back to back and potentially bring in the number one class in America again next year?
Yeah, yeah, I'll say yes, because if you look at this class, it's kind of a crazy circumstance in which they did sign this number one class. They don't have I mean, no, I mean, I just hyped up KJ Lacy. He's a talented kid. He's not, we don't have him in the top 247. That's not my call. That's our scouting team call. We're separate. Sorry, KJ, if you're watching. I think you're up there. So you don't have at least a top rated quarterback per rankings. He's still a 4-star, but he's not in, these number one Keelan Russell or that level. Michigan kid that who's a kid that signed
Underwood.
with Michigan.
Yeah, Bryce
Yeah,
Underwood.
Bryce Underwood, drawing a
Yep.
blank. You don't have that guy. And then they didn't have a single offensive line signee in the top 247. And again, Texas does their own evals. Sark will tell you they don't look at the rankings. I think they'd probably like the rankings to match, their recruits, but they go off their evals, and that's an example of that. They've seen all these guys in camp, they've seen all these guys in person, they love them. And so if you look at that and say they can still sign the number one class with those two areas not being, in terms of top tier rankings, what happens when they get those areas in the top tier rankings? You get a guy like Felix Oja, who's going to be arguably the number one offensive tackle in the country, potentially 5-star at least, I would think. You have a guy like Diabell, who's already a 5-star composite recruit, or close to, if not already. You have him recruiting other talent around him. This wide receiver class is loaded. They've got some top running back targets: Javian Osborne, KJ Edwards, Mari Latimer. Um, you know, on that back end, Jalen Lauder, Jermaine Bishop.
Sure.
There's guys all over. And so I think just in that alone, they have 2 commitments right now. And again, then we look at where Texas was in the summer. They it seemed like they were missing on everybody in July. Obviously, they turned it around and went on a hot streak to close out the fall. So yeah, I think Texas can absolutely be right there in the conversation to do it again. Just with where they're at right now alone.
That's awesome. If you want more great recruiting coverage and analysis from Hank South, just head over to horns247.com and you see Hank's Twitter handle right there on your screen. Make sure to give him a follow at Hank South 24/7. Hank, always enjoy chopping it up. Know you're running about 100 miles an hour, so really appreciate you giving us a few minutes today, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
Special thanks to Hank South of Horns 24/7 for joining us today. If you liked the video, please hit it with a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This is the BK Show, your one-stop shop for Texas Longhorns content right here on YouTube. We'll be back with more tomorrow. Remember, when you watch the BK Show, you rule. Hook 'em.